What's up, my dudes? Welcome to another episode of Money on Track. This time we're talking oil money. Mark, this is your cue to play some Arabic music, I guess, since we're talking Arab oil money. Get it? I'll do like a little stupid dance. I actually, Mark, never mind. So it's been raining. I've been wanting to film this for a couple weeks now, but it's been raining out here in Southern California. And since this is a car channel, I figured let's be in the Ferrari where you guys have the starlights. By the way, this Ferrari, I'm doing a giveaway on it. So if you don't know about that, if this is your first time tuning into the channel, make sure to check out make sure to check out the channel where I talk about the Ferrari giveaway. All you have to do is literally just subscribe to the channel and tune into a live stream on July 1st of this year, 2019. Yeah, that's basically it. So let's talk oil money, or oil field, the oil business. How do I transition to this oil field business from a towing company, which, by the way, didn't start off all that great? First piece of advice: don't ever do business with friends or family. Let me backtrack a bit and I'll come back to that statement in a bit. Like I said in the previous episode of Money on Track, I had 5 towing companies, 52 tow trucks, a Napa Auto Care Center, a tire shop, 100 employees. I was profiting 6 figures a month, which on paper sounds great, but in actuality it wasn't. The problem with a towing business is that it's open 24/7, 365. Now, what 24/7, 365 means is that it's open every minute of every hour of every day of every year, year after year after year. Now, it's great in the sense that the business makes money around the clock. So I'd literally go to sleep and wake up richer because the business was making money at nighttime. But the problem with all that is you literally get no time to breathe. You have no days off. I worked 29 days straight. I showed you guys the house I used to live in at the tow yard. I'd go home one day out of the month to spend some time with friends, family, or my dog. The rest of the time I was at work. My birthday is 4th of July, which so happens to be the busiest weekend of the entire year. So I wouldn't even get my birthday weekend off. Imagine that, for 6 years having to work on your birthday. It sucked. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, Easter, you name it, any one of the holidays, business is open. We gotta work. And the type of boss I was, or business owner, was I'd give my employees who were family men, the ones that had a wife, a kid, fiance, whatever, I'd give them the holidays off and I'd get behind the wheel myself and run the calls. So no days off at all, no birthdays off, no holidays, none of that stuff. I basically exhausted myself from overworking myself for 6 years straight. And we ran about 6,000 calls every single month, a bit over 6,000 calls. So even if we performed almost flawlessly, or we performed at like 99.5% without causing any damages to vehicles, or without an employee saying something offensive to a customer, that's still, that 0.5% is still 30 out of 6,000, right? So every single month I'd have to deal with 30 piss off customers because, like I said, the driver said something bad or damaged their vehicle. So a damage complaint every single day, which ends up taking a toll on you as time goes on. If you're dealing with a damage complaint every single day for a week, whatever, anyone can do it. But when you're doing it for 6 years straight, and when you have 100 employees, which obviously within that 100 you're gonna have a few bad apples that are going to make your life a living hell, I'm sure you guys can imagine how that ends up taking a toll on you. So to summarize the towing business, great money, a lot of money, but the headaches kind of outweigh all the money you would make. Now, this is the part where never, ever doing business with friends or family plays in. So a family friend of mine, a guy that I'd literally grown up with my entire life, I knew him since I was a year old. Let me turn this back on, sorry. A guy that I knew since I was a year old in Sweden. We grew up in Sweden and moved to the US at the same time. One day he told me that he's now a broker for oil fields. So just like a real estate broker for houses, he would connect the dots between buyer and seller, but instead of a house property, it would be for a oil field. So he tells me he's in the oil field market, which, by the way, was the market that I hated the most. I've never, ever liked the oil market because one of my biggest expenses as a towing company owner was fuel for my trucks. I would spend at least $100,000 every single month on fuel for the trucks. And in those years where oil prices were higher, I'd spend an extra $25,000 to $40,000 a month. So 25, 40, that is $300,000 to $480,000 every single year that I would have to spend extra just because the oil market had gone up. So to put that into perspective, that's a Lamborghini or Ferrari every single year. So just think about that. I would lose out on a Lamborghini or Ferrari every single year just because the oil prices had gone up. So needless to say, I hated this market. As luck would have it, one day I was being sued, of all things, by an employee. It was a complete BS claim. He was stating that I wasn't paying or wasn't even giving him lunch or meal breaks or, you know, cigarette breaks, regular breaks. Now, the average day of a tow truck employee is basically clocking in and running tow calls to whatever destination the customers want. So sometimes they end up 100 miles, 200 miles, 50 miles away from the tow yard. They were mobile employees. They were never in the office. So they would clock in, run that call, say they're 100 miles away, which would take them about 2.5 hours to complete. They would take their meal breaks, their lunch breaks when they were 100 miles away. So since they were a mobile employee, they wouldn't be in the office to clock out for their lunch breaks. So even though they were taking their meal breaks 100 miles away, I would have no proof of it on paper because they would only punch in for work and punch out whenever it was time to go home. They'd take their meal breaks 100 miles away as mobile employees, and they wouldn't punch in and out for their lunch breaks. Now, unfortunately, this is one of the most common lawsuits in the towing industry because a lot of these drivers know they can get $5,000 to $10,000 just by filing this, you know, BS claim, just because they could get away with it. And every year, I wouldn't allocate, but every year I knew I would have to spend $10,000 to $20,000 because I'd have to deal with one or two of these every single year. It's not the money that would piss me off, it was the principle of the matter that would piss me off. That, you know, these guys are able to get away with something even though it's completely BS. They're able to get away with it just because, you know, the system allows them to. Unfortunately, it was just one of those expenses of doing business. So as luck would have it, as I'm dealing with this lawsuit, as I'm dealing with a few damage complaints, as I've overworked myself, I'm drained, you know, emotionally and physically. My father had just passed away the year before, so everything that had to do with that business would remind me of him. As I'm dealing with all of this, one day I'm on the toilet seat and I'm reading the newspaper, and the article states that the current oil market is going through a recession. It's you know, the oil market has crashed. So as I'm dealing with all this and I'm reading this article, I'm ironically thinking, can the oil market, the one market I hate the most, can that be my gateway to peace? Can that be my road away from all this headache and stress that the towing business is causing me? That was literally it. That's all it took. The very next day, I decided to sell 4 of my towing businesses because I had taken one towing company, 5 tow trucks, and turned it into 5 different towing companies with 52 tow trucks. So I already knew the process of doing that. So I figured if the oil market doesn't work, if the oil business doesn't work, I can always convert this one towing company back into 5. And it took me 6 years before. I could probably get it done in about 4 or 5 years now, since I knew what the process of doing that would be. So yeah, that was it. I sold 4 of my towing companies. I kept one, and I called this family friend of mine and told him, hey, I want to buy an oil field. So now, without getting too technical into how an oil field is evaluated, how much money it's worth, the basic math behind it, the formula behind it is how many barrels of oil does this oil well produce per year? What is the current market value of a barrel of oil? Is it $110 a barrel? Is it 35? You know, is 70? Is it a newer well or is it an older one? An older one will get about 2 to 4x. A newer one will get 5, maybe as much as 20x. So they take that formula, they figure out how much it's worth. Now, because the oil market was currently going through a recession, banks were no longer giving out loans to purchase oil fields. They were only giving out loans to bigger companies like Exxon, ConocoPhillips, and BP. They weren't giving out loans to regular people like myself who were interested in purchasing oil fields. So they were all cash deals, like just like any other business deal. If you're buying cash, if the buyer has to buy with cash because he cannot obtain a loan for whatever reason, if your business that you're selling does not qualify for a loan, the buyer is going to get a better deal. So because I was paying cash for it, and because I was buying at an evaluation of $35 a barrel as opposed to like 110, I was basically buying this oil field for pennies on the dollar, or any oil field I'd be buying for pennies on the dollars. I called this family friend of mine. I told him, hey man, I want to purchase a oil field. So he showed a few different ones, and one of them really stood out to me. It was a 220 acre field that had 3 wells on it. The numbers were great. My ROI was going to be amazing. I was going to make a ton of money off of this. So I pulled the trigger. I purchased it. A few months went by, It was producing, but the numbers weren't adding up. It wasn't making the amount of money that it was supposed to make. I let a few more months slide by, but the numbers weren't there. The numbers were off. So I called the seller. I said, dude, it's not making what you told me you would make. I want my money back. You lied to me. Boom. Oh, I don't know why I did boom. That's weird. That's when he let me in on a little secret that there were actually 6 wells on this 220 acre piece of land. But this family friend of mine had kept 3 to himself. Think about that. So there were supposed to be 6 wells, but he kept 3 to himself. Now the other 3 wells were not producing wells, so they weren't making any money. They were shut-in wells, but I could have turned them on. I could have put a pump on there and I could have made money off of those. This family friend of mine lied to me. He didn't tell me about that. So as a broker, what he's legally supposed to do is disclose that, hey, there are 6 wells on this property. I'm going to keep 3 to myself. That's going to be my brokerage fee. The other 3 are going to be yours. Now, it's not common for something like that to happen. Normally, what a broker does is he gets a percentage of the sale price from the seller. He charges the seller. But this family friend of mine did something completely unorthodox and basically stole 3 wells from me from the deal without telling me about it. Not only that, but there was another oil field, a much bigger one. This one I believe was on 400 acres with 54 wells. I really want to purchase that one, but he told me not to purchase that. He told me the wells are really old, the numbers don't make sense, it's not a good field, blah blah blah. And blindly and naively I believed him because he's my family friend. He's not gonna lie to me. I've known this guy my entire life. Like I said, our families hang out every single weekend. So I believed him. I didn't pull the trigger on that, but it turns out that he was being deceitful. He told me not to purchase that field because his boss actually wanted to purchase it, and his boss ended up buying that oil field, and that oil field was much better than the one I had purchased. So the whole reason why I bring the story up is to never do business with family or friends, because I've never sued a person in my entire life, but this was one opportunity where I felt justified, and you know, I felt betrayed. I felt right to sue, but because we were family friends, because we would hang out once a month and our parents would hang out almost every single weekend, I let my emotions get the best of me and I decided not to sue the guy. So never do business with family or friends, because your emotions will deter you and prevent you from making the correct business decision. And in this case, the correct business decision for me would have been to sue him and get my money back, and maybe even sue him for a little more punitive damages. But I didn't. So luckily, however, and I mean very luckily, the guy that I had purchased the oil field from was a good old boy from Oklahoma. He had been in the oil business his entire life. He owned over 10 oil fields. So he swapped out my oil field for a really good one, which at the time was a non-producing well. Non-producing, like I said, is a well that isn't producing any oil. It's been turned off. Now let me break down how an oil well works. It all depends on your geological location. Let's say you're in the Middle East, for example, and there's so much oil, the oil level is so shallow, you could basically grab a shovel and start shoveling out oil. But in California, for example, you have to dig about 600 feet down into the ground to reach oil. There are other locations where you have to dig 5,000 feet, and there are some locations where you have to dig as much as 10,000 feet to reach oil. Now let's take the average well of 5,000 feet. So you would dig down 5,000 feet, and since your oil level is 400 feet, you would dig down another 400 feet. That's where your oil is. Above that, above 5,000, there's no oil. Below 5,400, there's no oil. So you have oil between 5,000 and 5,400 feet. Now in that piping between 5,000 and 5,400 feet, there's holes in the piping, so it sucks in oil all within that 400 feet. This is a vertical well because it goes straight up and down, and it sucks in oil from the surrounding 2.5 acres worth of land. That's how strong your typical pump is. It'll suck in oil from the surrounding 2.5 acres worth of land. That's a vertical well. That is what I previously had. So my 3 wells previously were vertical wells. Now this new well that I got was a horizontal well, meaning it goes down 5,000 feet, but at 5,200 feet, it curves and it shoots straight across for 10,000 feet. It's a horizontal well. All along that 10,000 feet, it has holes in the piping where it sucks in oil, all within the oil level of 5,000, 5,400 feet. It sucks in oil at 2.5 acre areas all along that 10,000 foot pole. So the surface area of how much a horizontal well sucks in oil is much greater than a traditional vertical well, because all along that 10,000 feet, it's sucking in 2.5 acres worth of oil all along 10,000 feet. Now, obviously, digging out a horizontal well is much more intrusive and expensive than digging out a vertical well. This specific well, the one that I have, cost $8 million to dig out. Now, when a big company like BP, Exxon, ConocoPhillips digs out a well. They expect that well to produce at least 1,000 barrels of oil per day, because they have literally thousands of wells that are producing tens of thousands of barrels of oil per day. So if it's not producing 1,000 barrels of oil, it's just not worth it for them to put the manpower into it. They actually make more money saving on taxes by taking that $8 million and writing it off as a business expense than they would from producing, let's say, 200 barrels of oil per day. 200 barrels of oil per day from a well is pennies. It's chump change for these bigger companies. But to an average guy like me, 200 barrels of oil per day is a very nice fortune. So that's exactly what happened. This bigger company that went in there, they dug the well out. It wasn't producing what they expected it to produce. Basically, when you dig a well, first you get a geologist that tries to estimate how much oil there's underground and where the levels are and how much oil it's going to produce per day and blah blah blah. So they took an estimated guess. They dug it out. Didn't make what they thought it would. So they took it as a $8 million expense and they just shut it down. They took their pump elsewhere and they shut that well down. That's where I came in. I got that well. I spent $250,000. I put in a massive pump and I started producing liquid gold and natural gas. So in the ground, there is crude oil, black oil, water, and natural gas. And your pump pumps up oil and water and it gets separated in these massive tanks. So your oil goes into one tank, your water goes into one tank, your water has to be disposed, and there's also natural gas. So in my well, there's a pipeline that runs directly to the gas company, and I sell the gas company gas, which they later on sell to households. So every time you turn on your water heater or your stove, your oven, your heater, you're using up natural gas, and that natural gas comes from a oil well just like mine. So not only do I produce oil, I also produce natural gas. So that basically summarizes my oil business. Quite a big of a difference from what I had previously, where I had to work 29 days straight. I have all the free time in the world now. It's Wednesday, 3 p.m. I'm making a video for you guys as opposed to being at work. I get to vacation whenever I want. The first thing I did whenever I sold my towing company was go on a 7-week backpacking trip across Europe. I've been to Europe 5 or 6 times in the last 2 years. I try to vacation once every 2 to 3 months. I'm going to Tokyo and Thailand next month. So quite a big of a difference what I have now as opposed to not even being able to take a birthday weekend off. What I want you guys to take from all this is that you have to build now. You've got to start working now. It took me 6 years to build an empire where I had enough money to be able to take that money and invest and become an investor. Life as an investor is much greater than life as a business owner, because when you're a business owner, you're stuck in business. What I do now is take my money, invest it into something, and try to make 5, 10, 20x on my money. And like I said, I have all the free time in the world. I no longer have to wait for weekends to go on a track day. I can get in my car whenever I want. If there's a track event, I could go. I have all the free time in the world. I'm my own boss now. I was my own boss before, but really my business was my boss before. There's a big difference between that. So I have true financial freedom now. I have true freedom of time. My mental state of mind is much better now than it was before. Making money is great, but nothing is worth more than your mental well-being. No amount of money will make you feel good inside. Having a peaceful soul is worth more than making any amount of money. And I realized that after I retired at 30, after I went on that backpacking trip, after I stepped away from that environment I was in. While I was in that environment, I was totally fine with it because that's all I knew. My only mindset at the time was work, make money, make money, make money. Now I've taken a step back. I'm actually making more money now, and I have all this freedom. It's the greatest thing in the world. So work now, build up to something greater, where in a few years you could be an investor. Now that's really the best part of life. When you're an investor, you put your money into something, you let that business or whatever that investment is, you make that investment make you 2, 3, 5, 10x on your money. You cash out and you move on to something else. I've talked about it before. Build up to something greater, and that's what I did. And not everyone agrees with it, but for me it is the greatest thing. So yeah, that is my oil business. Next time we'll talk about my real estate company that I have out in Florida, where I develop communities at a time. Oh, actually, what I'm doing next as far as the oil business is I'm getting a water well. So I'm taking a non-performing oil well, so I'm going to buy it cheap because it's not producing anything. I'm going to convert it into a water disposal well. So like I told you guys, you get water and you get oil. you separate the water from the oil. This water well that I'm getting can take in 10,000 barrels of water per day. The average rate, what I'm being charged currently for disposing my water, is $1 per barrel. Now, the company that's taking my water, I know all of its routes. I know all the different fields that it stops by. The company disposes 100,000 barrels of water per day. So the one well that I'm going to purchase is going to dispose 10,000 barrels a day. And instead of selling it at $1 per barrel, so $10,000 per day, I'm going to cut the price in half to 50 cents. So I'm going to be making $5,000 a day on that well, which is pretty good money. If the well is open 22 to 25 days out of the month, that's $125,000 a month. So a pretty nice chunk of change. It's a nice side business. But the main reason why I'm doing that is to become a nuisance and a real pain in the ass for the current company that's taking my water away. Because they're disposing of 100,000 barrels a day, they cannot reduce their prices from $1 to 50 cents because they reduce down to 50 cents on 100,000 barrels. So that's $50,000 a day that they would lose out on. And they probably have a business loan that they've taken out to purchase all those wells. So it's probably not a expense that they could currently tackle on. Now, the reason why I want to be a nuisance for them is because I want them to buy me out. I want to put some fear into their mind, thinking that I got this one well and I could get another well and another well. So now I can go from 10,000 barrels a day to 20, 30, 50, and really take a big chunk of their money away. So if they feel that way, what they're going to do is they're going to buy me out. They're going to put me out of business, right? They're probably going to make me sign an NDA that I'm not going to have another water well for an X amount of years, which I'm totally fine with signing, but they're going to have to pay up for that. So basically, I'm taking the startup mentality into an oil field. You can take the startup mentality into any type of business. I'm using it and I'm applying it for this oil field. So starting something and hoping that the bigger guy, the bigger dog, will end up buying me off. So that's going to be something else that I'm going to do very shortly. And yeah, I guess I'll tell you guys how that goes. It's probably going to take about 6 months to about a year for me to get paid off on that. But hey, I'm doing that as an investor. I'm going to buy a non-producing well for cheap and hopefully make 10, 20x on my investment. So that's that. Hope you guys enjoy this video. But most importantly, I hope you guys learned something. So start working out to build up to something greater. That's one thing to take away, and don't do business with friends or family. And like I said, next episode, we'll talk about my real estate construction company that I have out in Florida, where I think I already told you guys I develop communities at a time. So until then, ciao. Finally. This was the second time I recorded this entire thing because the first time I forgot to press record. Yes.